When the HOA president forced my pregnant sister to lift her shirt in her own bathroom, she made one fatal mistake. She didn't know who I was. Because I'm not just a lawyer, I'm a Supreme Court justice. And what she did that day, what she did to my sister, I swore I would make her pay for one law at a time. I still remember the moment I pulled into my childhood driveway that afternoon. The sun was sharp, blinding, almost bouncing off the mailbox that still had our family name engraved on it. I hadn't told my sister Emma I was coming. I just wanted to surprise her, show up with takeout talk about baby names, maybe laugh about our ridiculous HOA. But the moment I stepped out of the car, I knew something was wrong. Emma was sitting on the front steps, her hands shaking her belly, 8 months pregnant, rising and falling with uneven breaths. She was crying. Not the quiet kind of crying, but that raw, broken sobbing that comes from somewhere deep. I dropped my briefcase right there on the pavement and ran to her. "Emma, what happened? Are you hurt? Is the baby okay?" She looked up at me, and her eyes, God, I'll never forget that look. They were hollow, like someone had drained all the light from her. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I can't live here anymore." I knelt beside her, not caring that my suit was getting dirt on it. "Tell me everything." She took a deep breath and began. And as she spoke, something inside me twisted rage, disbelief, and the cold surgical clarity that only comes when I know the law's been broken. She told me about Margaret Patterson, the HOA president, a woman in her late 50s with a pastel wardrobe and a God complex, the kind of woman who thinks a clipboard gives her divine authority. Margaret had marched up to Emma's house that morning with 2 other board members, said the garden gnomes on her lawn were in violation of community aesthetic guidelines. Emma had tried to explain they were a gift from our grandmother who passed away 2 years ago. They'd been sitting there quietly ever since, hurting no one. But Margaret didn't care. "They need to be removed immediately," she said. Emma, exhausted from a doctor's appointment, told her she'd handle it tomorrow. Margaret's response, "Tomorrow isn't good enough." And then things got darker. Margaret accused Emma of suspicious activity, packages, visitors, deliveries, the kind of vague nonsense people invent when they want an excuse. "We have reason to believe you're hiding something," she said. Emma laughed at first, because how else do you react when someone suggests a pregnant woman is running some kind of drug ring out of her home? But then Margaret said something that froze her blood. "We'll need to search your property." Emma told her no, she had no right. But Margaret waved her phone like a badge. "Section 15, paragraph 8, she said. "The HOA can inspect any property if there's suspicion of illegal activity." And then get this, she threatened to call the police. "We can do this the easy way, or I can tell them you're refusing to cooperate in a drug investigation." Drug investigation? Against my sister, my pregnant sister. Emma panicked. She didn't want a scene, didn't want sirens outside her home. So she let them in. They tore through the place, dumped out drawers, ripped through closets, went through her baby's nursery like vultures. Margaret was the worst of them, picking up baby bottles, flipping through Emma's mail, even checking the crib. "This seems expensive," she'd said. "How did you afford it?" When they reached the bedroom, Emma tried to stop them. "Please, you've seen everything, just leave." But Margaret wasn't done. She found Emma's prenatal vitamins and grabbed them like evidence. "What are these?" she asked. "They're prenatal vitamins and iron supplements. You can read the labels," Emma said. "They could be anything," Margaret replied coldly, and pocketed them. And then came the part that made me see red. Margaret told Emma to lift her shirt. At first, Emma thought she'd misheard. But Margaret said it again, louder. "If you're not hiding drugs, prove it." She ordered her to lift her shirt to show her stomach to a woman 8 months pregnant. Emma said no. Of course she said no. But Margaret leaned in, her voice sharp as ice. "Refusing only makes you look guilty." And that's when my sister broke. She was terrified. She was crying, and she lifted her shirt. I felt my fists clench just listening. I could barely breathe as she described how Margaret and those 2 women stood there staring at her pregnant belly like they were looking for contraband. "Turn around," Margaret ordered. Emma did. "Roll down your pants," she said next. Emma begged, "Please don't make me do this." But Margaret just smirked and said, "Or I make the call." So my sister obeyed. She stood there, shaking, humiliated in her own home. When Emma finished her story, she was trembling again. They took my vitamins, she said. I need those. The doctor said my iron is low. Sarah, what if? I stood up. My voice came out cold flat. What you just described is illegal search and seizure, assault, coercion, theft of medical property, and possibly false imprisonment. Emma looked scared. Sarah, what are you going to do? What was I going to do? I was going to burn that HOA to the ground. I didn't tell her who I really was. She knew I worked in law, but not how far I'd gone. She didn't know that the next morning when I started making calls, every single person on the receiving end knew exactly who I was. Within hours, I had everything I needed. Witness statements, photos, the HOA's bylaws, a statement from Emma's doctor confirming that taking away her medication endangered both her and the baby. And then I walked into the local police station. I need to report a crime, I said. The sergeant barely looked up. What kind of crime, ma'am? I dropped a folder on his desk so hard it made him jump. Illegal search and seizure, assault, coercion, theft of medical necessities from a pregnant woman, reckless endangerment. He started flipping through the file, his eyes widening. Ma'am, this is serious. Who are you exactly? I handed him my card. Justice Sarah Mitchell, Supreme Court of the United States. The color drained from his face. Yes, ma'am. I'll get detectives on this immediately. And they did. 2 days later, they showed up at Margaret Patterson's perfect little house with a warrant. She was pruning her roses, probably humming to herself, still convinced she ran the world. When the detectives cuffed her on her front lawn, her mouth fell open in disbelief. There must be a mistake, she shouted. But there wasn't. They charged her with multiple felonies. Her 2 board accomplices, too. They seized HOA records, her laptop, everything. What they found made my blood run cold and my anger burn hotter. Margaret had been pocketing fines for years, thousands of dollars. She'd been using HOA authority to bully, harass, and intimidate residents. She had notes about people she didn't like, little dossiers where she listed infractions she could use against them. My sister's name was underlined 3 times. She'd targeted Emma because Emma had once filed a complaint about Margaret's dog attacking a child. Margaret retaliated. The so-called inspection was revenge. When the DA called me, he said, Justice Mitchell, this is one of the worst abuse of authority cases I've ever seen. She's going away for a long time, but I wasn't finished. I asked for an emergency HOA meeting. I wanted everyone there. The board, the residents, the people who had watched Margaret terrorize this community and said nothing. When I walked into that community hall, you could hear a pin drop. Emma sat in the front row, her husband beside her holding her hand. I stood before the crowd and said, Good evening. My name is Sarah Mitchell. Some of you know me as Emma Coleman's sister. Others may know me by my professional title, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. The silence that followed was heavy. I'm here tonight. Not as a justice, I continued, but as a sister. A sister whose pregnant sibling was violated in her own home by people who thought power meant impunity. I told them everything, every detail, how Margaret forced her way inside, how she took my sister's medication, how she made her strip in her own bathroom. The room was dead silent except for gasps and muffled cries. This wasn't an inspection, I said. It was assault. It was coercion. It was a violation of every constitutional right this country stands for. One board member, a younger man named David, raised his hand weakly. Justice Mitchell, we didn't know how bad it was. I turned toward him. You thought what? That it was okay to let one woman play dictator because it didn't affect you? Ignorance isn't an excuse. Every person who stayed silent while this happened bears responsibility. I held up a stack of papers. These are 23 written complaints from other residents, people too afraid to speak while Margaret was in power. She broke into homes, falsified fines, and humiliated families. And you all let her. People started murmuring. The board members looked like they wanted to disappear. So here's what's going to happen, I said. This HOA dissolves tonight. You're going to vote to dismantle it and rebuild it under proper oversight with rotating leadership, transparent accounting, and term limits. You'll refund every illegal fine she ever issued, and you'll publicly apologize to every family she hurt. One of them stammered, We can't just— Yes, you can, I cut him off. Or I'll make sure every national news outlet knows that this HOA enabled the assault of a pregnant woman. I leaned forward. What's it going to be? They voted. Unanimously. Within 15 minutes, the HOA was gone. I looked over at my sister, tears streaming down her face, not from pain this time, but from relief. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy, just a calm certainty that justice had finally landed where it belonged. Later, as I walked out of that building, the air felt different, lighter. The neighborhood that had once been ruled by fear was finally free. But I kept thinking about that day, the look on Emma's face when she said, "I can't live here anymore." That helplessness, that shame, and I made myself a promise never again. Not to her, not to anyone. Power without accountability isn't order, it's tyranny. And tyranny has no place in a neighborhood or in this country. Because justice isn't just something that happens in a courtroom. Sometimes it starts in a driveway. Sometimes it starts in a bathroom. And sometimes it starts when someone finally says enough.